Clara Wilson, 32 years old, had a passion that defined her life: caring for others. As a registered nurse, she had dedicated more than a decade to relieving human suffering in a bustling urban hospital. But something changed when she accepted a position at a community hospital in the heart of a small town in the interior of the United States, known for its apple orchards and fall festivals, but also for rumors of inexplicable events in an old hospital founded in the 19th century. Upon arriving at St. Luke's Memorial Hospital, Clara was greeted by a facade that was an intriguing mix of neoclassical architecture and modern additions. The original building, constructed with reddish bricks, displayed the charm of a bygone era, with tall windows and a grand entrance that seemed to invite and intimidate at the same time. The newer extensions, though functional, could not replicate the dignity and mystery aura of the main body. As she walked through the corridors on her first day, Clara felt a strange mixture of emotions. The hospital was permeated with the characteristic smell of cleaning products and a slight but persistent fragrance of old flowers, as if the past did not want to be completely forgotten. The wooden floors creaked under her steps, echoing through the long corridors that seemed to stretch infinitely. Clara's co-workers were cordial, with quick smiles and looks that hid untold stories. When they gathered in the break room, conversations were often interrupted by loaded pauses, as if words were deliberately left unsaid. "You'll get used to the noises," said an older nurse, laughing, after noticing Clara's inquisitive look toward a banging sound coming from an apparently empty wall. "This place has a life of its own at night," she continued, an ambiguous gleam in her eyes. As the day unfolded, Clara tried to focus on her responsibilities, administering medications and caring for patients with her usual professionalism. However, she could not ignore the growing feeling that there was more to this hospital than just medical records and sterilized equipment. There was an almost palpable presence, a whisper between the walls that spoke of old memories and secrets buried in the building's foundations. In the days that followed, Clara began to adapt to the new routine and the rhythm of the hospital. She soon found herself immersed in the flow of daily tasks, attending to patients with a variety of medical needs and getting to know her colleagues better. The hospital served a small but diverse community, and the work was relentless, though rewarding. Mornings at St. Luke's were particularly busy, with doctors making their rounds and nurses coordinating care. Clara appreciated these moments of intense activity, finding comfort in the familiarity of medical procedures. However, even with the hustle and bustle, she couldn't ignore certain peculiarities of the hospital. The hospital corridors, though well-maintained, retained echoes of a past era. During her rounds, Clara often noticed that cabinet doors opened on their own and lights flickered without explanation. Initially, she attributed these incidents to the building's age and the mechanical failures common in older structures. However, murmurs among the staff suggested another explanation. "Have you felt it?" asked a nurse named Marjorie as they had coffee in the small staff kitchen. "At night, this place changes. It's like the walls know we're here watching." Clara, though skeptical, couldn't help but be intrigued by these accounts. Marjorie was a veteran of the hospital, with nearly 20 years of service, and spoke with a conviction that lent weight to her words. She told Clara about fleeting visions of figures at the ends of corridors and the sound of footsteps following staff late at night, when most of the hospital was silent and empty. "But it's room 204 you really need to avoid at night," Marjorie said with a grim expression. "Something happened there a long time ago. Something bad." Room 204 was currently unoccupied, used only to store additional equipment and medical supplies. Clara felt an involuntary curiosity about the room, driven both by Marjorie's accounts and her own desire to unravel the mystery. On a quiet afternoon, determined to explore further, Clara headed to room 204. The door creaked open, revealing a space filled with shelves holding sheets and medical equipment. The air inside the room was noticeably colder, and an inexplicable feeling of being watched enveloped her immediately. As she inspected the room, the silence was broken by an almost inaudible whisper. Clara turned towards the sound, her heart racing, only to find the room as empty and quiet as before. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air, and a sudden sense of urgency made her quickly leave the room, the door closing behind her with a definitive click. Uncertain about what she had truly experienced, Clara was determined to continue her investigations. She knew there was something more to St. Luke's Hospital, something hiding in the shadows and the silences between the walls. A few weeks after the incident in room 204, Clara was fully integrated into the hospital's routine, but her curiosity about the strange happenings did not leave her. It was then that she was assigned to care for a new patient, who would soon become central to her experience at the hospital. The patient, an elderly man named Harold, had been admitted due to chronic respiratory complications. Harold was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a series of stories about his life in the town. As days passed, a special bond began to form between him and Clara. During their care sessions, Harold frequently shared memories of his youth, painting a vivid picture of the town's past and, occasionally, of the hospital itself. In one of these conversations, Harold mentioned, almost casually, his own belief that the hospital was haunted. "You felt it, haven't you?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that took her by surprise. "This place holds more than just the living, my dear, and some of us can feel more than others." Clara, intrigued and somewhat uncomfortable with Harold's assertiveness, pressed him for more details. Reluctantly, he recounted how his wife had passed away many years ago in that very hospital and how, occasionally, he felt her presence by his side, especially on the darker days. Harold's accounts served to increase Clara's interest in the hospital's unexplained phenomena. She began spending more time with Harold, not just out of professional duty, but also in the hope of better understanding the stories he shared. On a particularly quiet night, as Clara checked Harold's vital signs, she felt a sudden drop in temperature in the room. The air grew heavy, almost as if charged with static electricity. Harold, seeming to notice the change, smiled sadly and whispered, "She's here." Clara looked around, her heart racing, but saw no one. However, the feeling of not being alone was undeniable. The soft light of the lamp began to flicker, and a light breeze swept through the room, even though the windows were closed. Scared but fascinated, Clara realized that Harold was right. Something else was happening in that hospital, something that defied rational explanation. In the days that followed, Clara continued to care for Harold, now with a new perspective on her role at the hospital. She felt like a guardian not only of the living patients but also of the stories and secrets the old corridors held. The spectral presence that Harold felt became a sign for Clara that she needed to delve deeper into the hospital's mysteries and, if possible, help the spirits who seemed unable to find rest. As the days turned into weeks, Clara began to witness phenomena that she could no longer rationalize as mere imagination or coincidence. It was on a Tuesday night, a notoriously quiet period at the hospital, that Clara had her first clear and undeniable visual encounter with what could only be described as a ghost. It was almost midnight, and Clara was making her nightly rounds through the hospital's silent corridors. The dim hallway lights cast long, distorted shadows, creating a setting that seemed straight out of a suspense film. As she passed the corridor leading to room 204, the same room she had investigated weeks earlier, she noticed something strange through the crack of a slightly open door. Driven by a combination of curiosity and a sense of duty, Clara gently pushed the door open. The room, which should have been empty, was bathed in a pale light that did not seem to have an identifiable source. In the corner, near the window that showed only the darkness outside, stood the figure of an elderly woman, dressed in what appeared to be an old nursing uniform. Clara froze, her heart beating so loudly she could hear the echo in her ears. The figure seemed busy, fussing with something Clara couldn't clearly see. As Clara took a hesitant step into the room, the floor creaked under her weight. The figure stopped, slowly lifting her head. The face, though partially obscured by the dim light, was undeniably that of an older woman, marked by lines of time and a disturbing serenity. "Can I help you?" Clara managed to murmur, her voice almost a whisper. The figure did not respond immediately. After a long moment, she simply said, "They never leave. You know? They stay. With you, with me, with this place." Before Clara could fully process the words or gather the courage to respond, the figure slowly faded, as if absorbed by the night's darkness outside, leaving Clara alone in the room with only the sound of her own accelerated breathing. Trembling, Clara retreated and quickly left the room, closing the door behind her. The encounter left her shaken, but also more determined than ever to uncover the truth about the hospital and the spirits that seemed to reside there. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen, and a part of her didn't want to. There was something these spirits needed, something she might be able to do to help them. After the disturbing encounter with the nurse's apparition in room 204, Clara found herself compelled to seek deeper explanations for the supernatural phenomena at the hospital. She began her search by going to the local library, hoping to unearth some historical record or journalistic account that could shed light on the mysteries of St. Luke's Memorial Hospital. At the library, Clara spent hours sifting through old newspaper archives, historical records, and books about the town's history. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through dusty documents that spoke about the hospital's founding in the late 19th century, the doctors who had worked there, and the many patients who had passed through its doors. Among these yellowed pages, she found sporadic mentions of inexplicable incidents and mysterious deaths, but nothing conclusive. Determined not to give up, Clara decided to speak with people who might have direct knowledge or stories passed down through generations. She interviewed older residents of the community, including former hospital employees. Many were hesitant to talk, exchanging nervous glances or changing the subject when Clara mentioned the ghosts. However, an old nurse named Martha was more open. "You saw the nurse, didn't you?" Martha asked, her voice low and serious. Her name was Agnes. She worked at the hospital during the Great Flu. She saw more death than most. They say she never got over the loss of those she couldn't save. She hanged herself in the hospital in room 204. Martha's words made Clara shiver. Agnes's story added a new layer of sadness and complexity to the events Clara was witnessing. It seemed that the spirits haunting the hospital were bound by unresolved tragedies, their souls unable to find peace. Armed with this new information, Clara felt a mix of compassion and renewed determination. She knew she couldn't ignore Agnes's pain or the other spirits still wandering the hospital's corridors. Driven by a deep sense of responsibility, Clara decided she would do everything in her power to help these spirits find the release they so desperately needed. The next day, Clara returned to the hospital with a new plan of action. She would investigate more deeply the rituals or practices that could be used to calm or help the spirits move on. Her quest led her back to the hospital, specifically to the old records and diaries kept in the administrative wing, where she hoped to find some forgotten knowledge that could be the key to solving St. Luke's mysteries. Reinforced by Agnes's story and motivated by a profound sense of duty, Clara began to open dialogue about the hospital's supernatural occurrences with her colleagues more directly. Most of her journey so far had been solitary, but Clara knew that to fully understand what was happening and find a solution, She would need the support and shared experiences of others. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, Clara gathered a small group of nurses and technicians in a rarely used staff break room. The worn walls and old furniture provided the perfect setting for the conversation that followed. "I know many of you have your own experiences that you don't share openly," Clara began, her voice firm but welcoming. "I believe that if we pool our stories and observations, we can better understand what's happening and maybe find a way to help these spirits." Initially, there was hesitation. Many looked at each other, exchanging uncertain glances. But then, a young lab technician named Eric stepped forward. I saw something one night," he began, clearly nervous. "I was working late in the lab when I saw a figure pass by the glass door. I followed, thinking it was a colleague needing something, but there was no one there, and the corridor was colder than usual." Others began to share their stories. A nurse named Sophie recounted hearing whispers and children's laughter in the pediatric wing, which used to be very active but had been partially closed. "Whenever I pass by at night, I feel like I'm not alone. Sometimes, I hear my name being called in a whisper." As more accounts emerged, a pattern began to form. It was evident that the supernatural activity was not confined to one area or one person. It was an integral part of the hospital, rooted in its history and the many souls who had passed through its doors. Encouraged by the stories, Clara proposed creating an informal log of all occurrences so they could be documented and analyzed. If we can map out when and where these events occur, maybe we can understand their causes or discover what the spirits want to tell us. Additionally, Clara suggested holding a session with a medium or paranormal expert, someone who could help communicate directly with the spirits. The idea was met with a mix of skepticism and interest, but most agreed it was worth trying if it could bring some peace or answers. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of camaraderie and a common purpose. Clara felt less isolated in her quest, now supported by colleagues who also felt the need to understand and help. Together, they hoped to unravel the mysteries of St. Luke's Hospital, not just for themselves but for the souls who had not found rest. In the days following the meeting with her colleagues, Clara and her team began meticulously documenting every supernatural incident at St. Luke's Hospital. The paranormal activities, which once seemed sporadic and scattered, now seemed to intensify, as if the attention given to them had somehow energized the spiritual entities. One night, while Clara was on duty in the corridor near room 204, the epicenter of many reports, she experienced one of the most intense manifestations yet. The corridor was enveloped in deep silence, interrupted only by the occasional hum of the fluorescent lights. Suddenly, all the lights flickered simultaneously, and an icy chill invaded the space, making Clara shiver involuntarily. Before she could react, a series of knocks sounded against the walls, starting softly but growing in intensity until it seemed someone was hammering every surface around her. Clara, clutching her clipboard tightly, called out to whatever presence was there, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm not here to hurt you. I want to help." As her words echoed through the corridor, the lights stabilized, and the air slowly began to warm again. Clara took a deep breath, trying to control her racing heart. In the ensuing silence, a faint, melancholic voice whispered through the corridor, saying only one word, "Freedom." This event was just the beginning. In the following days, other staff members reported similar experiences. Medical equipment began to move on its own. Paper reports disappeared and reappeared in impossible places, and several times, the figure of a woman was seen wandering the corridors, vanishing whenever someone tried to approach. Each incident was meticulously recorded, and Clara began to notice patterns. The manifestations were more frequent at night and almost always involved old hospital wings or areas that had been the scene of past tragedies, such as room 204. Motivated by these discoveries, Clara organized a special session one night, bringing in a medium known for her work with haunted locations. The team gathered in room 204, the air heavy with anticipation and a slight fear. The medium, a middle-aged woman with a calm presence, prepared the space with candles and protective symbols, then began to invoke the spirits. What followed was an experience none of the attendees would ever forget. As the medium called out to the spirits, the room's temperature dropped drastically. One by one, the candles went out, leaving the group with only the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. Then, with a clarity that sent shivers down everyone's spine, Agnes's voice, the nurse Clara had seen on her first visit to the room, echoed through the space, sad and imploring. Clara, her eyes fixed on the spot where the voice seemed to originate, felt a mix of compassion and terror. She knew at that moment that her journey was far from over. If something could be done to help these spirits, she was determined to find the way. The session with the medium had opened a new chapter in the investigation of paranormal activities at St. Luke's Hospital. Clara was now more convinced than ever that spirits like Agnes were asking for help, a way to be released from the bonds that tied them to that place. Inspired by the words heard during the session, Clara decided to deepen her interaction with the spiritual world in an attempt to solve these mysteries once and for all. Determined to confront the supernatural directly, Clara organized a series of nightly encounters at the hospital, focusing specifically on the areas where paranormal activity had been most intense. Equipped with voice recorders, infrared cameras, and other equipment to document and possibly communicate with the spirits, she was ready for whatever might happen. On a particularly dark night, with the wind howling against the hospital's old windows, Clara and a small team of brave colleagues gathered in room 204. The room, already laden with stories and memories, felt especially heavy that night. Clara began the encounter by lighting candles and forming a circle of protection with coarse salt, as instructed by the medium. Agnes, if you're here, or any other spirit trapped in this place, we ask you to communicate with us. Clara began, her firm voice echoing slightly against the room's cold walls. We want to help you find peace. Almost immediately, the room's temperature dropped, and a deep silence took over the space. The infrared camera, positioned to capture any movement, began to show whitish figures floating around the circle. One of the recorders picked up a faint voice, almost drowned out by the sound of the wind outside. I can't leave. Too much pain. The session continued with Clara and her team asking questions and trying to establish a more direct dialogue with the spirits. They discovered that many of the spirits felt unable to leave the hospital due to unresolved traumas or a residual attachment to their past lives in the physical world. After several hours of intense communication and many revealing recordings, Clara felt that a breakthrough was near. She proposed conducting a liberation ritual, using information she had collected in her research and advice from the medium. Combining elements from various spiritual traditions, the ritual aimed to provide the spirits with the peace they couldn't find on their own. On the night chosen for the ritual, Clara and her team set up an improvised altar in the center of room 204, with personal items of the identified spirits, candles, crystals, and sacred symbols. Clara led the ritual with a series of prayers and invocations, asking the spirits to accept the light and peace offered. As she recited the final verses of the ritual, a soft light seemed to fill the room, gradually growing in intensity until all Clara and her team could see was an enveloping whiteness. They felt a wave of warmth and tranquility pass through them, a sense of relief and renewal. When the light finally faded and the room returned to normal, Clara felt a palpable change in the atmosphere. The air was lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Exhausted but hopeful, she recorded the session's final moments, noting the peaceful stillness that replaced the chilling cold. The following days would reveal if the ritual had been successful, but Clara felt a deep sense of duty fulfilled. She had faced the unknown and helped those who no longer had their own voice. What she did not yet realize was how profoundly this experience would affect her own destiny in the days to come. In the days following the liberation ritual, St. Luke's Hospital was remarkably quieter. Reports of paranormal phenomena drastically decreased, and many staff members, including Clara, felt a palpable change in the building's atmosphere. It seemed the ritual had been successful, bringing peace to the spirits who had finally found rest. Clara, however, did not have much time to celebrate the success. She was increasingly absorbed by her experiences at the hospital, feeling an inexplicable and deep connection to the place and its hidden secrets. Her dedication to helping the spirits did not go unnoticed by her colleagues, who began to worry about her well-being, noticing that Clara seemed increasingly distant and introspective. The night after the ritual, Clara decided to spend one last night in room 204, feeling she needed closure for her own journey. She set up a camera to document her last hours at the hospital, wanting to leave a record in case something significant happened. With the room's lights off and only candles illuminating the space, Clara sat in the center of the room, beginning to meditate and reflect on the events of the past few weeks. The camera recorded silently, capturing the moment's serenity. As the night progressed, a subtle mist began to form inside the room, slowly swirling around Clara, who seemed not to notice, lost in her contemplation. The recording shows Clara suddenly standing up, as if hearing something inaudible to the camera. She began to speak softly, but her words were indistinct, blending with the wind's whisper outside. Without warning, the candlelight intensified, enveloping Clara in a blinding glow. She extended her hands as if receiving or transmitting a powerful energy. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light disappeared, leaving the room in complete darkness. When the lights finally returned, Clara was gone. The camera, still recording, captured only the empty room, with the candles consumed and a deep silence filling the air. Clara's colleagues, alarmed by not finding her in the morning, reviewed the recordings and found only the mysterious video as a clue to her last moments. An intensive search was launched, but there was no sign of Clara inside or outside the hospital. It was as if she had been absorbed by the hospital's very essence, leaving only unanswered questions behind. News of her disappearance spread quickly, leaving the hospital community and the town in shock. Clara, the dedicated nurse who had come to heal not only the living but also the dead, had herself become a mystery, part of the legend of St. Luke's Hospital.